Tales from the Coast Guard. Episode 1. The Piper Alpha. The year was 1988, well into the Scottish oil boom of the 80s. During this time, thousands of jobs were being created onshore and at sea aboard offshore oil rigs. The heart of this thriving industry was the northern Scottish city of Aberdeen. One of the largest, most important rigs for the industry was the Piper Alpha. This rig sat approximately 120 miles northeast of Aberdeen. The rig accounted for 10% of the North Sea oil and gas production at the time, having 226 persons on board working night and day to extract natural gas and fuel for the homes of millions. Our tale begins on July 6th. July 6th, 1200 UTC. Two condensate pumps, Pumps A and Pump B, begin operating to displace the platform's natural gas for transport to the coast. This morning, Pump A was undergoing routine maintenance. During this maintenance, a flat metal disc was used to cover where the safety valve used to be, which was removed due to the ongoing maintenance. Unfortunately, the maintenance could not be complete by the evening, so the disc was left on and the duty engineer filled in a permit notifying that Pump A should not be switched on as maintenance was still ongoing and the safety valve was not in place. July 6th, 1800. The day shift had finished and began packing up their gear, heading to their cabins, looking forward to some well-needed and well-earned R&R. They handed over to the night shift. The oncoming night shift contained 62 men that would be running the Piper Alpha until the morning. As the shifts changed, the day shift engineer did not inform the oncoming duty custodian of the condition of the Pump A, as the custodian was quite busy with other things. So he decided to place the permit in the control centre for him to see later, and left. The duty custodian never found this permit. July 6th, 1900. Like many platforms of the time, the Piper Alpha had an automatic firefighting system driven by diesel and electric pumps in order to fight any fires in case of emergency. These diesel pumps were designed to suck in large amounts of seawater to aid in fighting fires. At this time, the system was put under manual control by the OIM, Offshore Installation Manager. Due to the fact that there were divers in the water, this was a routine procedure that was usually done, as during summer hours, the divers often operated for up to 12 hours a day. They'd shut down the automatic firefighting system because if these divers were any close to the pump intakes, the force of suction could pull them in and, well, let's say they would not have a happy ending. July 6th. 21:45. Pump B tripped and was unable to be restarted due to problems with the methanol system that occurred earlier in the day. Methane clathrate, a flammable ice, had started to accumulate in the compression system's pipework, causing a blockage. This led to a buildup of natural gas liquids, leading to Pump B being unable to function and also unable to be restarted. Now, as Pump A was undergoing maintenance and Pump B was now blocked and unable to restart, this left the entire platform without its power supply for the entire offshore work. It was all dependent upon this pump that had now failed. The manager now had only a few minutes to get one of the pumps back online, otherwise the power supply would fail completely. The clock was ticking. July 6th, 21:52. A search was made for any documents relating to the maintenance on Pump A and whether it could be restarted or not. The permit for the overhaul was found, but not the permit stating that Pump A must not be restarted under any circumstances due to the missing safety valve. No one present on the night shift was aware that the vital part had been removed. The manager therefore assumed from the existing documents he had to hand that it would be safe to start Pump A, thus averting the failure of the power supply. July 6, 21:55. The oil rig is rocked by a massive explosion, shaking the whole platform. As Pump A was switched on, gas flowed into the pump, and because of the missing safety valve produced a lot of pressure that the loosely fitted metal disc could not withstand. Gas audibly leaked out at high pressure, drawing the attention of several men and triggering 6 gas alarms. But before anyone could act, the gas ignited and exploded, blowing through the firewall, which was made up of 8 by 5 foot panels bolted together, purposely designed to halt explosions. The force of the explosion was so great, it blew straight through and almost entirely destroyed the control room, killing key personnel responsible for the coordination of the rig. Luckily, custodian Jeff Bollins, who had been in the room and witnessed the alarms going off, somehow managed to survive. And he immediately activated the rig's emergency stop button before escaping. This emergency stop button halted all production, closing huge valves in the seal lines and ceasing all oil and gas extraction. In theory, this should have isolated the flow of oil and gas and then contained the fire. However, the platform was originally built just for oil. The firewalls were designed to withstand fire, not explosions. The first explosion broke the firewall and dislodged panels around Module B. One of these panels was flung across the room, rupturing a small condensate pipe, creating another fire aboard. July 6th, 2204. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is Palpa Alpha, Palpa Alpha, Palpa Alpha. We have suffered an explosion on board, requiring immediate assistance. Radio operator David Kinraid called the Mayday via radio, hailing for help. Unfortunately, Palpa Alpha's design made no allowances for the destruction of the control room, and the organization aboard disintegrated. No attempt was made to use loudspeakers to order an evacuation. Despite Bollins' activation of the emergency stop, there were no alarms warning the workers aboard, as much of these systems had been destroyed in the initial blast. July 6, 2205. Search and rescue station at RAF Louisemouth in north-east Scotland received its first call notifying of a possible emergency. A number 202 Sea King helicopter, call sign Rescue 138, was requested by the Coast Guard station in Aberdeen. The RAF station at Bulmer was also notified, and a Hawker Siddeley Nimrod maritime patrol aircraft was sent to act as the on-scene commander by RAF Kinnell Coss, using the call sign Rescue 01. July 6, 2206. The Piper Alpha was now suffering a massive fire. The heat from the flames ruptured a crude oil storage tank in Module B, flooding the area with crude oil. This ignited almost instantaneously, creating a massive black plume of smoke. This burning oil then dripped onto a lower platform used for diving operation. The floor of this platform usually consisted of steel grates. Under normal circumstances, this would have allowed the oil to drip harmlessly through the grates and into the sea. But the divers on the previous shift had placed rubber matting on the grates, likely to help them to stop slipping or cutting their feet on the sharp metal grate. Unfortunately, though, this allowed the oil to form a burning puddle on the platform. July 6, 2220. The heat from the burning oil collecting on the dive platform causes the nearby tartan pipeline to rupture violently, releasing around 15 to 30 tons of its highly flammable contents at immense pressure every second. This ignited into a massive fireball. The heat and subsequent shockwave was felt by vessels up to 1 kilometre away. July 6, 2230. A large semi-submersible firefighting/dive rescue and accommodation vessel, the Pharos, drew up alongside the Piper Alpha. The Pharos used its water cannon where it could. Unfortunately, it was restricted because of the sheer power of the cannon. If this water cannon were to hit any person on board, it would kill or injure them due to the immense force of the stream of water. The Pharos had also managed to set up a hospital with an onshore medic assisted by diver paramedics from the Pharos dive team, and a triage and reception area was also established on the vessel's helideck in order to receive any incoming casualties. July 6, 2250. The MCP-01 pipeline fails and explodes, shooting huge flames over 300 feet into the air. The Pharos was driven off by the heat, which was melting steelwork and machinery aboard the Piper Alpha. It was after this explosion that the nearby Claymore platform stopped producing and pumping oil. After this explosion, many were already dead aboard the Piper Alpha, killed by the explosion, shockwaves, fire, or smoke inhalation. Anyone still left alive was desperately sheltering in the fire-scorched, smoke-filled accommodation block. Some even leaped from the various deck levels, including the helideck, which was nearly 175 feet above sea level, hurling themselves into the icy North Sea, desperate to escape the raging fires and explosions aboard. The standby vessel Sandhaven had launched a fast rescue boat to assist in retrieving these men, but the explosion trapped this boat in debris during its rescue attempt, killing nearly all of the crew on board. Only the driver of this vessel, Ian Leatham, survived, as well as the 6 Piper Alpha survivors they had managed to rescue from the water. July 6, 2318. The Claymore gas lines ruptures and explodes, adding even more fuel to the massive firestorm on board, with thousands of cubic meters of highly volatile fuel burning every second. The 20,000-ton steel platform is beginning to melt under this extreme heat. July 6, 2335. Rescue helicopter 138 arrives on scene. I can only imagine what the crew must have saw as they come over the horizon, witnessing this horrific sight of a giant fireball, seeing the vessels trying to get close, seeing people fling themselves off the platform into the sea below. July 6, 2335. Helicopter Rescue 138 arrives on scene. July 6, 2337. The Pharos contacts Rescue 01 to appraise the situation. Meanwhile, a standby vessel has managed to pick up 25 casualties, including 3 with severe burns and another who is badly injured. The Pharos then requests evacuation of all its non-essential personnel in order to make room for oncoming casualties. Rescue 138 is tasked to evacuate these 12 personnel from the Pharos and transfer them to the Ocean Victory, another vessel in the area, before returning with paramedics. July 6, 2350. After the ongoing fireball and multiple explosions aboard the Piper Alpha, the critical support structures have burned away. With nothing left to support the heavier structures on top of the platform, the Piper Alpha begins to collapse into the North Sea. One of the cranes aboard totally collapses, crashing down amid the raging fireball, quickly followed by the entire drilling deck. For the men still sheltered in the accommodation block, this would have been a horrific sound of screeching steel and loud crashes as their rooms teeter and start to lean. I can only imagine the panic that must have befallen them as they were sheltering in their rooms, surrounded by smoke, gasping for air, in unbearable heat, and then hearing this cacophony of noise, this screeching and creaking of metal. They would have been desperately hoping and praying for any form of rescue. Then the worst thing imaginable happens. After the crane and the drilling decks have collapsed into the sea, it's shortly followed by the entire accommodation block, sending those surviving men plunging into the depths of the North Sea with no chance of escape, trapped in their rooms as they slowly fill with water. At this point, most of the Piper Alpha platform has now collapsed and slipped into the North Sea. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Rescue 138 lands on the Pharos and transfers the non-essential personnel to Ocean Victory. July 7th, 0007. Rescue 138 lands on Ocean Victory, transferring paramedics. July 7th, 0017. Rescue 138 then begins winching up serious burn casualties, picked up by the standby safety vessel MF Silver Pitt. July 7th, 0025. The first seriously injured survivor of the Piper Alpha is winched aboard Helicopter Rescue 138. July 7th, 0045. The entire Piper Alpha platform is now gone. Module A is all that remains. July 7th, 0048. Rescue 138 lands aboard the Pharos with 3 casualties picked up from the MV Silver Pitt. July 7th, 0058. A civilian helicopter, a Sikorsky S-61, arrives at Pharos from Aberdeen, carrying another emergency medical team to help treat all the seriously injured casualties aboard. July 7th, 0147. Coast Guard helicopter lands on the Pharos with even more casualties. The medical team aboard would have been overwhelmed with the amount of serious burns and other injuries from people that had leapt off the platform into the sea below. July 7th, 0225. The first helicopter leaves Pharos with the casualties, heading for Aberdeen Royal Infirmary Hospital. July 7th, 0327. Rescue 138 lands aboard the Pharos with the bodies of 2 men. By now, Rescue 138 is running low on fuel, so they then leave to refuel at the drilling rig Santa Fe 135. July 7th, 0515. Rescue 137 arrives at Pharos and begins collecting casualties to bring back to Aberdeen. Now, these men that were aboard would have been shocked, shaken, freezing cold or burnt, having witnessed the men that they've spent the last few months working with either be killed in explosions or watching them collapse into the sea. I think it'd be hard to think about how lucky they were managing to jump off after seeing everyone they know and had worked with over the last months get sent to the depths of the ocean. July 7th, 0621. The lucky few injured survivors of the Piper Alpha now leave Pharos by the civilian S-61 helicopter bound for Aberdeen. The horror of this day forever in their minds. July 7th, 0725. Rescue 138 picks up the remaining survivors from Pharos and takes them back to Aberdeen. All in all, out of the 226 people that are on board the Piper Alpha, only 61 survived. 165 members of the crew were killed. 2 men were also killed as they valiantly rescued survivors. Ian Leatham being the only survivor aboard the fast rescue boat that was deployed by the Sandhaven to help rescue people jumping off the Piper Alpha. The Piper Alpha disaster is one of the worst maritime disasters in history, especially in UK waters. The fire raged so much and was so strong that it continued to burn for 3 weeks despite firefighting efforts. It was eventually extinguished by the team on board the Pharos, and to this day there is still a marker buoy within the vicinity of the Piper Alpha to remember what happened on this day. The accommodation platform that collapsed into the sea contained 100 people. They sheltered in there in hope for their lives, trying to run and hide from the explosions and the raging fire so hot that it was melting steel and machinery. But ultimately, this decision to run and hide and seek shelter in the accommodation block is what led to their deaths. The accommodation block was recovered by divers in late 1988 from the seabed, and the bodies of 87 men were found inside. If you are ever in Aberdeen, I recommend that you visit the Kirk of St. Nicholas down on Union Street. There you will find a chapel dedicated to the memory of those who died in this disastrous event. The survivors and relatives of those who died went on to form the Piper Alpha Families and Survivors Association, which continues to campaign on North Sea safety issues. The wreck buoy marking the remains of the Piper is approximately 1.1 nautical miles from the replacement Piper Bravo platform. A lasting effect of the Piper Alpha disaster was the establishment of Britain's first post-Margaret Thatcher trade union, the Offshore Industry Liaison Committee. 10 years after the disaster, in 1998, 1 month after the 10th anniversary, Professor David Alexander, Director for the Aberdeen Centre for Trauma Research, carried out a study into the long-term psychological and social effects of the Piper Alpha. 36 survivors agreed to give interviews or complete questionnaires. Almost all of this group reported psychological problems. More than 70% of those interviews recorded psychological and behavioural symptoms of PTSD. 28 said they had difficulty in finding employment following the disaster. It appears that some offshore employees regarded Piper Eiffel survivors as Jonahs, bringers of bad luck, a common theme amid seamen, who would not be welcome on other rigs and platforms. The family members of the dead and surviving victims also reported various psychological and social problems. Alexander also wrote that some of these lads are stronger than before Piper. They've learned things about themselves, changed their values, some relationships became stronger, people realised they have strengths they didn't know they had. There was a lot of heroism that took place. If you have any further interest in the events of this day, there are many different BBC broadcasts or pictures online and documentaries that are available, so you can see some of the devastation that was caused. And if you ever are in Aberdeen, I recommend you visit the church or the Ferry Hill Church. There's a beautiful window there that's created which has different dots remembering each worker aboard the Piper Alpha. Thank you for listening to episode 1 of Tales from the Coast Guard, the Piper Alpha disaster. If you have any requests for further episodes or information, feel free to email me at talesfromthecoastguard@gmail.com. That's talesfromthecoastguard@gmail.com. Until then, I will see you next week on Tales from the Coast Guard.